You're not afraid of losing abundance. You're afraid of discovering it was never meant to stay. Somewhere inside you, a quiet voice keeps score of what vanished, not what was given, and that voice may already be deciding what leaves next. There's a strange amnesia that settles into the soul after the miracle fades. Yesterday's rescue becomes background noise, today's provision feels accidental, and tomorrow starts to look dangerous again. The mind quietly edits its own history, highlighting loss, minimizing rescue, until gratitude thins and anxiety takes its place. This forgetting doesn't scream, it whispers. It convinces you that the source grows tired, that benefits expire, that abundance is temporary by design. And the more the memory distorts, the more the inner world tightens, bracing for absence instead of expecting continuity. What's unsettling isn't the lack itself. It's the possibility that something unseen has been issuing commands beneath your awareness all along. And if forgetting is a command, what has remembrance been suppressing? There is a fracture that almost no one wants to look at directly, not because it is dramatic, but because it is intimate. It hides inside habits of thought that feel reasonable, even spiritual. You say you believe, you say you trust, you say you know abundance is possible. And yet, when you close your eyes, what rises first is not proof of provision, but evidence of disappearance. The mind keeps a ledger, everyone has one, but yours, quietly, almost politely, has been trained to underline the moments of loss in dark ink, while the moments of rescue are written in pencil, faint and erasable. What once felt like a miracle becomes a footnote. What once saved you becomes something that happened back then, and what vanished becomes identity. Notice how effortlessly you can recall what didn't work, how quickly the body tightens when you remember the season, when support withdrew, when money dried up, when love failed to stay, when safety dissolved without warning. The chest remembers before the mind does. The nervous system reacts as if it is still happening. This is not memory, it is rehearsal. And yet, ask yourself this with brutal honesty. Why does the mind go quiet when abundance arrives? Why does provision feel like an exception instead of evidence? Why does rescue feel like luck instead of law? You tell yourself you're being realistic. You call it wisdom. You say you've learned not to get your hopes up, but beneath that language, something more painful is operating. A subtle agreement has been made. I will remember loss vividly, so I won't be surprised by it again. It feels protective, it feels mature, it feels earned. But it is a betrayal, because while you claim belief, your subconscious is cataloging absence as truth. While your mouth says, I trust, your inner world is bracing, and the body always believes the rehearsal, never the affirmation. This is where the contradiction lives. You are asking for continuity while emotionally expecting interruption. You are praying for flow while internally preparing for drought. You are speaking abundance while your inner memory insists that benefits expire. And here is the most uncomfortable realization. The subconscious does not distinguish between what you fear and what you expect. It only knows what you repeat, what you revisit, what you allow to define the story of how life works. Every time you replay the loss, you strengthen its authority. Every time you minimize the rescue, you weaken its signal. Over time, abundance becomes something that happened once, while lack becomes something that is always about to happen. This is not because you are ungrateful. It is because forgetting is easier than trusting continuity. Forgetting allows you to stay vigilant. Forgetting keeps you from feeling the full vulnerability of hope. But something is quietly collapsing under this strategy, because the more you forget what sustained you, the more your inner world begins to treat support as unreliable. And when support feels unreliable, expectation shrinks. When expectation shrinks, the field responds differently. You may not consciously choose this, but your inner atmosphere does. And somewhere deep inside, a silent conclusion has already been drawn. Abundance comes, but it doesn't stay. That conclusion has weight, it has gravity, it has consequences that haven't fully revealed themselves yet, and that is where the danger waits. There is a moment, rare, uncomfortable, almost unbearable, when the mind begins to realize that it has been working against itself while calling it survival. You didn't decide to mistrust continuity. You absorbed it. You learned it in fragments, in overheard conversations, in sudden endings, in promises that dissolved without explanation. Somewhere along the way, the nervous system learned a quiet rule: what arrives will eventually leave. And once that rule settles in, the subconscious begins to organize reality around it. This is where the sabotage becomes almost invisible. You don't reject abundance. You accept it cautiously. You receive it with one hand while gripping the exit door with the other. You enjoy the moment, but only halfway, because some part of you is already preparing for the aftermath. The body never fully relaxes, the breath never fully deepens, the gratitude never fully lands. And because it never lands, it never roots. Abundance passes through instead of settling, not because it isn't offered, but because the inner world has already decided it is temporary. The subconscious says, "Don't get used to this," and the field listens. This is the part no one likes to hear. Your inner mistrust has become louder than your stated belief. You say you believe in provision, but you emotionally rehearse scarcity. You say you trust the source, but you secretly suspect exhaustion. You say everything works out, while scanning for the moment it stops. That scanning is not neutral, it is directive. The subconscious is not poetic, it is literal. It takes emotional emphasis as instruction. Whatever you return to, again and again, becomes law. Not moral law, not spiritual theory, but lived expectation. Loss, when remembered vividly, becomes a template. Rescue, when minimized, becomes coincidence. And coincidence, repeated enough times, loses authority. This is why forgetting is so dangerous, because forgetting doesn't erase the past, it edits the future. When benefits fade from memory, the inner world stops expecting them. And when expectation dissolves, the entire system recalibrates. The body tightens, the choices shrink, the risks feel heavier, the openness disappears. You don't notice it happening at first. It feels like maturity. It feels like caution. It feels like you're being realistic. But realism, when built on selective memory, becomes a cage. And here is the most unsettling truth of all. The subconscious is always listening, not to what you say, but to what you assume. And assumptions are born from memory, not the memory of facts, but the memory of feeling. If the strongest feeling you carry forward is the shock of loss, then shock becomes familiar. If the deepest imprint is disappearance, then disappearance feels normal. And what feels normal begins to repeat itself without resistance. This is not punishment. This is not fate. This is not failure. It is a command that has been issued quietly, over time, through what you chose to remember and what you allowed to fade. And now, something inside you is starting to stir. Not relief, not hope, but a sharp, disorienting awareness. If forgetting has been issuing commands this whole time, what has remembrance been capable of doing, if it were ever allowed to speak? That question does not resolve itself. It waits. And in that waiting, something ancient, precise, and deeply unsettling is about to be revealed. There is a law at work here, silent, indifferent, exquisitely obedient. It does not respond to pleading. It does not negotiate with desire. It does not recognize intention unless intention has been felt into memory. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because it explains too much. This law was operating long before you named it, long before you asked why patterns repeat, long before you wondered why certain breakthroughs arrive only to dissolve. It has been shaping outcomes not through force, but through familiarity. The subconscious does not chase what you want. It maintains what you expect. And expectation is not born in thought. It is born in rehearsal. Here is the revelation that unsettles the nervous system when it lands fully. Memory is not passive storage. Memory is active instruction. Every remembered feeling is a signal broadcast forward, teaching the inner world what to prepare for next. This is why forgetting is not neutral. When you forget benefits, emotionally, not factually, you are not merely losing gratitude. You are withdrawing a signal. You are lowering a frequency. You are telling the subconscious this is not what endures. And the subconscious obeys, not because it is cruel, but because it is precise. It mirrors what is rehearsed. This is where old beliefs begin to crack. You were taught that belief is enough, that words are enough, that affirmations spoken once or even daily should override everything else. But the law does not respond to repetition of language. It responds to repetition of felt memory. What you have felt most often becomes your baseline. What you have remembered most vividly becomes your expectation. What you expect quietly organizes your choices, your posture, your risk tolerance, your openness. And then, the outer world answers that organization. This is the betrayal hidden inside forgetting. Because every time you minimize a rescue, calling it luck, coincidence, timing, you strip it of authority. You tell the inner world, this was not law. This was an exception. Exceptions do not repeat. Law does. The subconscious learns quickly. It learns from emotional emphasis, not explanation. When loss is remembered with intensity, tight chest, shallow breath, replayed shock, it becomes instruction. When provision is remembered vaguely, without sensation, without embodiment, it fades into noise, and noise does not command. This is why remembrance is not nostalgia, it is not positive thinking, it is not optimism, it is signal maintenance, it is frequency selection. It is the act of telling the subconscious, this is what endures, this is what returns, this is what is normal. Forgetting says, prepare for absence. Remembrance says, prepare for continuity, and the law, unseen, impartial, responds to whichever one you rehearse. This is not metaphor, it is mechanism. And once this clicks, a deeper discomfort emerges, because it means that many of the commands shaping your life were never spoken aloud. They were remembered, or not. And in that realization, the ground shifts again, because now the question is no longer, why did this happen? The question becomes far more dangerous. What have I been training my inner world to expect without realizing it? That awareness does not soothe, it sharpens, and it opens the door to something that feels both powerful and terrifying. Because once you understand that remembrance is a command, you begin to feel the weight of every moment you allowed to disappear without being felt. This is where awe collides with grief. Think back, not intellectually but somatically, to the times you were carried when there was no visible way forward. The moment resources appeared just before collapse. The person who arrived unexpectedly. The delay that turned into protection. The door that closed and spared you something you didn't yet understand. Notice what happens in the body as you approach those memories. They are often distant, muted, soft around the edges, almost unreal. Now compare that to how vividly the losses live inside you, how sharp they are, how easily they surface, how quickly the body remembers the shock, the confusion, the fear. Those memories are not archived, they are active, and this is the final piece of the mechanism that most people never see. The subconscious does not measure truth by accuracy, it measures truth by emotional intensity. Whatever carries the strongest charge becomes reality's blueprint. So when loss is charged and provision is neutralized, the system does not conclude that life is generous. It concludes that life is unpredictable at best, withdrawing at worst. And from that conclusion, it shapes expectation. Expectation is not a thought, it is a posture. It is the way you enter rooms, the way you price your worth, the way you hesitate before asking, the way you hold back just enough to avoid disappointment. Expectation becomes behavior. Behavior becomes pattern. Pattern becomes confirmation. And then the mind says, see, this is how it always goes. Not realizing it has been following instructions written by memory all along, this is where the existential awakening begins, not gentle, not comforting, but precise. Because it reveals that the invisible law has never been punishing you. It has been listening, listening to what you revisit, listening to what you emphasize, listening to what you let fade. And now another betrayal surfaces, one that cuts deeper than disappointment. You were never abandoned. You were distracted. Distracted by the pain that demanded attention, distracted by the fear that felt urgent, distracted by the losses that screamed louder than the rescues that whispered. And in that distraction, remembrance lost its authority. But authority can be restored, not through effort, not through will, not through forcing belief, through signal, through rehearsal, through the deliberate act of letting provision land in the body long enough to be remembered as law. That possibility is not comforting yet. It is destabilizing, because if forgetting has been quietly shaping your outcomes, then remembrance is not optional. It is dangerous. Dangerous to old patterns, dangerous to familiar disappointment, dangerous to the identity built around bracing instead of expecting. And somewhere inside you, a subtle tension is rising, not hope, not certainty, but recognition. A sense that something has been paused, waiting for you to choose which signal continues. And that choice, whether you realize it or not, is already approaching its moment of declaration. And now, notice the moment you are in. Not the screen, not the words, the inner pause that has opened. That quiet suspension where something in you knows this is not just information passing through, it is a crossroads. A subtle threshold where attention itself becomes a declaration, because attention is never neutral. Where you place it, you feed. What you stay with, you authorize. What you return to, you rehearse. This is why this moment matters more than it appears to. If remembrance is a signal, then choosing to stay engaged is not a casual action. It is alignment. It is the decision to keep the frequency alive long enough for it to root, to refuse the old habit of letting insight pass without landing. When you press like, it is not approval of content, it is a bodily agreement. A way of saying, I choose continuity over interruption. When you comment, it is not engagement, it is declaration. A signal sent outward and inward at the same time. I am present with this. When you subscribe, it is not a button, it is commitment, a refusal to forget, a decision to keep returning to this field of remembrance instead of slipping back into emotional amnesia. These actions are small on the surface, but the subconscious does not measure size, it measures meaning, and meaning is created through repetition. You are not being asked to do anything extraordinary. You are being invited to stay, to mark this moment, to anchor it, to let the inner world know. This mattered enough to remember, because forgetting happens easily. Remembrance requires presence, and presence is a choice you can feel in the body right now, tight or open, withdrawn or leaning forward, braced or receptive. This is not about supporting a channel. It is about supporting a signal. The signal that says benefits do not expire. The signal that says continuity is allowed. The signal that says abundance is not an accident. It is a pattern that responds to what is rehearsed. And if part of you feels a quiet urgency, an unspoken sense that letting this slip would be a mistake, trust that. That urgency is not pressure. It is recognition. Something in you knows this is not random. So choose. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deliberately. And as you do it, feel how the inner atmosphere shifts, just slightly, away from bracing and towards something unfamiliar. Expectation, not the kind that demands, the kind that assumes. And that assumption is where the next movement begins. There is no technique coming to save you. No list, no steps, no ritual you can perform outwardly to override what has been rehearsed inwardly for years. What begins the shift is far quieter and far more demanding. It is the act of conscious recollection, not remembering as information, not replaying events like scenes from a movie, but re-entering moments of provision until they are felt again, physically, emotionally, unmistakably. This is where most people stop, because it feels uncomfortable, because it feels undeserved, because it feels risky to let the body relax around memories when it has learned that relaxation precedes loss. So instead, you skim the surface. You say, yes, that happened. And then you move on. But the subconscious does not register acknowledgement, it registers immersion. Conscious recollection means allowing the nervous system to relive the moment when support arrived, not the story, but the sensation, the relief in the chest, the softening in the jaw, the breath that finally deepened. the quiet disbelief that followed survival. You don't narrate it. You don't analyze it. You let it happen again. And something strange occurs when you do. The body begins to learn a new rhythm, not excitement, not euphoria, but familiarity. Provision stops feeling like a fluke and starts feeling known. This is why words are insufficient. Words stay in the mind. Recollection rewrites the body, and the body is where expectation lives. At first, it feels artificial, almost wrong. The mind interrupts. Don't get too comfortable. The old reflex tightens. The old shadow whispers, "This won't last." And that is precisely where the work is. Not pushing the thought away, not arguing with it, but staying with the memory anyway. Letting the feeling of having been supported remain longer than the fear of losing it. This is rehearsal, not of desire, but of continuity. You are not trying to create abundance in the future. You are teaching the subconscious what has already been true and allowing it to register as law. The moment you feel the body soften, even slightly, you are issuing a new command. This is safe to expect. That command is fragile at first. It trembles. It does not overpower the old pattern immediately, but it exists now, and existence is enough to begin destabilizing what once felt permanent. Because the subconscious cannot serve two rehearsals equally, one will eventually dominate, and the one you feel always wins. But this shift does not bring relief yet. It brings tension, because as the body begins to remember continuity, the identity built around bracing starts to feel threatened. And threatened identities do not dissolve quietly, because the moment the body begins to accept continuity as possible, everything that survived by expecting interruption goes on alert. This is where the tension sharpens. You may notice resistance that feels irrational, a sudden restlessness, an urge to distract yourself, to intellectualize, to scroll, to move on to something else that feels safer, lighter, less demanding. This is not failure. This is exposure. The old internal structure was built on vigilance, on readiness, on the identity of the one who survives by never fully settling. And conscious recollection threatens that structure, not with violence, but with softness. Softness is terrifying to a system trained by loss, because softness implies trust, and trust implies vulnerability, and vulnerability remembers pain. So the shadow rises. It reminds you of everything that went wrong after you relaxed. It pulls forward images of disappointment, betrayal, collapse. It says, "You know better than this." And here is the crucial distinction, one that determines whether the shift deepens or retreats. You do not fight the shadow. You do not silence it. You do not replace it with positivity. You simply do not let it end the rehearsal. You stay with the felt memory of provision alongside the fear. You let both exist in the body at once. This is not comfortable. It feels paradoxical. The chest may ache. The throat may tighten. Tears may rise without story. This is the nervous system renegotiating its contract with reality. For the first time, it is being asked to hold support without immediately scanning for collapse. And even if it can only do that for a few seconds, those seconds matter more than hours of affirmation, because the subconscious does not track duration, it tracks contrast. One moment of genuine felt continuity stands in direct contradiction to years of bracing, and contradiction weakens certainty. When certainty weakens, identity loosens, and when identity loosens, something new has space to emerge. Not hope, not belief. Permission. Permission to expect without apology. Permission to receive without rehearsing loss. Permission to let benefits feel ongoing, not borrowed. But this permission is unstable at first. It flickers. Some days, recollection will feel alive and grounding. Other days, it will feel flat, unreachable, almost imaginary. That fluctuation is not a sign to stop. It is evidence that the inner system is reorganizing. Old commands do not relinquish authority easily. They fade through repetition, not of effort, but of experience. Every time you allow a memory of provision to be felt instead of dismissed, you strengthen a new signal. And every time that signal strengthens, the old one loses clarity. This is not a breakthrough moment. It is a quiet reprogramming, one that happens beneath language, beneath thought, beneath intention. And because it is subtle, it is easy to abandon. But something in you already knows this is not about doing more. It is about letting what already happened finally count. And as that realization settles, another shift approaches. Not in what you do, but in who you are allowed to be when you stop bracing. That shift is not gentle. It is an identity rupture. And it does not announce itself in advance. Something begins to destabilize, not outside you, but who you thought you had to be in order to survive. Because when the body no longer rehearses disappearance as law, the identity built around vigilance starts to fracture. The one who stayed alert, the one who never relaxed too much, the one who measured joy in doses small enough to manage the aftermath. That identity feels responsible, mature, earned, but it was forged in fear. And fear does not dissolve politely. As remembrance gains weight, a new posture quietly emerges. Not confidence, not bravado. Something more dangerous to the old self. Expectation. Not expectation that pleads. Expectation that assumes. The kind that doesn't scan for exits. The kind that doesn't apologize for receiving. The kind that doesn't brace when things are good. This is where the rupture happens. Because the world will not immediately change, but you will. And that change creates friction. People may not recognize you. Situations may feel misaligned. Old dynamics may strain. Why? Because the one who expected interruption behaved differently. They over-explained. They overgave. They under-asked. They tolerated inconsistency because it felt familiar. But the one who expects continuity moves differently. Not louder, not harder, steadier. They no longer treat support as a favor. They no longer treat abundance as borrowed time. They no longer narrate gratitude like a goodbye. Their inner ledger has shifted. Benefits are no longer marked as temporary events. They are recorded as precedent. And precedent changes everything. Precedent shapes posture. Posture shapes choice. Choice shapes pattern. You may feel this emerging as a subtle discomfort, a sense that certain compromises now sting, that certain dynamics feel off, that certain self-diminishing habits feel strangely intolerable. This is not arrogance, it is recalibration. Because when the inner world accepts continuity as normal, it becomes difficult to pretend that instability is acceptable. And here is the most unsettling part of this reconfiguration. The old identity will try to return. It will whisper that this new steadiness is naive, that you are tempting fate, that remembering too deeply will only make the next loss hurt more. That voice is not evil, it is afraid of losing relevance. Because an identity built on bracing has no role in a system that expects support. And yet, it still holds power. Which is why this shift does not resolve cleanly. It creates a split. One part of you leaning into continuity, another part watching, waiting for proof that it's a mistake. That tension is not a flaw. It is the threshold. And how you stand in that tension, without collapsing back into vigilance, without forcing certainty, will determine which identity gains authority next. And the system is still listening. Because identity is not changed by declaration. It is changed by what no longer feels possible to deny. As remembrance deepens, something irreversible begins. Not dramatic, not visible, but final in its own quiet way. The old reflex to shrink back after receiving starts to feel foreign. The impulse to preemptively apologize for wanting more loses urgency. The internal narrative that once said, "Enjoy this while it lasts," begins to sound outdated, almost superstitious. This is not confidence, it is familiarity. Familiarity with being carried. Familiarity with provision appearing without panic. Familiarity with continuity as a lived assumption. And familiarity changes identity at a structural level. You stop seeing yourself as someone who occasionally experiences abundance, and start experiencing yourself as someone to whom support returns. That distinction is subtle, but it is everything. One identity waits, the other expects. One braces, the other opens. And the opening does not feel reckless. It feels grounded. It feels quiet. It feels strangely unremarkable, because what is expected no longer feels extraordinary. This is where power emerges, not as force, but as refusal. A refusal to narrate rescue as luck, a refusal to minimize what sustained you, a refusal to forget what proved continuity once already. Your inner ledger is no longer negotiable. Benefits are recorded with weight. Provision is remembered with sensation. Support is no longer dismissed as coincidence. And because the subconscious now has a different baseline, it begins to organize reality differently, not magically, not instantly, but inevitably, because expectation shapes engagement. Engagement shapes outcome. And yet, here is the unresolved edge that remains. As this identity is still new, it has not been tested fully. It has not yet faced its first real contradiction. It has not yet been challenged by the next unexpected delay, the next closed door, the next silence where reassurance once lived. That moment will come, and when it does, the temptation to revert, to say, "See, it never lasts," will be powerful. That is why this identity cannot be defended with logic. It must be inhabited, which means the tension remains between the one who once survived by expecting loss and the one who now lives as if benefits do not expire. That tension is not meant to resolve yet. It is meant to sharpen awareness, because the final question has not been answered. It has only been prepared, and it is waiting, quietly, for the moment you decide what remembrance will now be allowed to command. The atmosphere is not closing, it is holding, and what it holds is unfinished. So now you are here, not at an ending, not at a conclusion, but inside a field, a charged stillness. Nothing has been solved, nothing has been promised, nothing has been sealed, and yet something is undeniably different, not in the world, in the way the world is being anticipated inside you. That anticipation hums quietly. It doesn't announce itself as hope. It doesn't call itself faith. It doesn't even ask to be trusted. It simply waits. Waiting is dangerous territory for the mind that learned to survive by bracing, because waiting without tightening feels like exposure. Waiting without rehearsing disaster feels like forgetting how pain once arrived. And yet, this waiting feels different. It is not empty. It is not naive. It is not blind. It is listening. Listening for what remembrance will now be allowed to instruct. Because remembrance has not finished speaking. It has only just been given permission to breathe again. To rise from the shadow where it was buried beneath urgency and fear. To stand beside loss without being eclipsed by it. The shadow is still here. It hasn't vanished. It hasn't been defeated. It watches. And light, real light, not denial, does not destroy shadows. It changes their shape, it makes them move, it makes them reveal what they were attached to all along. So the question does not arrive as a sentence, it arrives as a sensation. A subtle, unsettling awareness that the next time support appears, whether quietly, imperfectly, or just in time, you will feel it differently, that you will either let it pass through you like noise, or allow it to register. And that choice will not feel dramatic in the moment. It will feel ordinary, almost forgettable, which is why it matters, because forgetting has been issuing commands for years, quiet ones, polite ones, commands that sounded like realism, wisdom, caution. But remembrance issues commands too. And now that you know this, now that it has been named without being resolved, you cannot unknow it. You may try to return to bracing. You may try to minimize the next benefit. You may try to tell yourself this was just another idea. But something has already shifted beneath language. A signal has been disturbed, and disturbed signals do not settle easily. So the atmosphere remains open, unfinished, charged, listening, not asking what you believe, but watching patiently, precisely, for what you will choose to remember next.